Based on his research, Piaget identified 4 stages of cognitive development. He said that this is, a discontinuous model, meaning it's a stage model where children pass through in the same order, but perhaps at different paces. Now, there has been more recent research and kind of criticism of Piaget's theory. More modern researchers believe that he likely underestimated children's cognitive ability at each of these ages. They argue that children really probably pass through at a bit of a faster rate than Piaget initially theorized. But nonetheless, the sensory motor period, pre-operational period, concrete operational, and formal operational periods are the 4 periods that make up, or the 4 stages that make up this model. A mnemonic you can use to remember is "so Piaget can fly." So let's talk about each of these stages one at a time. So the sensory motor period is from birth until about age 2. During this time, children rely really heavily on their innate motor responses to any kind of sensory stimulus in their environment. So I want you to think of what baby toys look like, if you've ever seen baby toys. They're things that are very stimulating to the senses. They make noise, there's flashing lights, they have that like crunchy texture that when you feel the toy, it makes kind of like that crunching sound. But the bottom line is that children in this stage, before the age of 2, before they've developed the ability to use language, are taking in the world around them through their senses. They're not making sense of the world just yet. The milestone that's reached in this particular period is something we call object permanence. So if you were to take, let's say, a 5-month-old, right, and let's say put a teddy bear up in front of them and then cover the teddy bear up with a blanket. To them, the teddy bear is gone. They're not going to try to check underneath the blanket to see if the teddy bear is still there, because children younger than 6 months lack what we call object permanence. Around 6 to 8 months, children start to develop object permanence, which is this awareness that objects continue to exist even when they're out of sight. So, for example, if an 8-month-old, you had them sitting on the floor and they were playing with a ball. If the ball rolls under the couch, that 8-month-old is going to try to look under the couch to see where the ball went. But again, if you were to have that same thing happen with a younger child who lacks object permanence, they wouldn't even look for the ball, because to them, the ball was gone and it's gone forever. Think about separation anxiety. Children who are younger than 6 months, when their guardian goes away, to them, they're never coming back. So this can be a source of separation anxiety for kids. However, I've also seen in older children that separation anxiety can be caused because of object permanence, because they know that when parent goes away or guardian goes away, they're still there and they can come back. So I've seen the separation anxiety thing kind of go both ways. Really interestingly, new research on babies show that babies to some degree are actually able to process numerical information. So here's an example of research that was done where babies, 5-month-olds, were shown numerically impossible outcomes. And what researchers found is that those babies as young as 5 months will stare longer at the impossible outcome. Here's the experiment. So these 5-month-olds are watching 2 objects placed in a case. A screen goes up to cover the objects. An empty hand comes in and removes an object. So now the children are shown a possible outcome, which is that obviously there would only be 1 object left, or the impossible outcome, that there are still 2 objects there. And again, they found that babies, even as young as 5 months old, stare longer when they're shown the impossible outcome. So really interesting research regarding babies. And actually the researcher who was responsible for this, we see her again when we talk about morality. So from the sensory motor stage, children then progress into what we call the pre-operational stage of development. And this is from about age 2 until about age 6 or 7, and this is when children can use language. So their language development is there. They've learned how to use grammar properly, but they can't quite comprehend any kind of concrete logic just yet. And pre-operational children have some really interesting limitations that are unique to them. One of them is animism. So believing, for example, that inanimate objects have human-like characteristics. This is why kids are, they engage in pretend play at this age. This is Elise having a tea party with her little animals and pretending that they're her guests at her tea party. That's animism. Another thing that they are is they're very egocentric, or they have what we call egocentrism. So what this picture is actually showing is we had this little chart that we were using to get Elise to sleep in her own bed at night. So every night when she would sleep in her own bed, we have little unicorns that attach onto the Velcro. So when she fills up this chart with unicorns, she gets a prize at the end. Okay, so we've got a little token economy going on, right? So what she did, she decided she didn't want to use the chart anymore. So she took her chart and she placed it high up on this bookshelf that we have, thinking that it was out of our sight because it was out of her sight. So a child in this pre-operational stage can only see the world from their own perspective. So to her, because she couldn't see the chart, neither could we. She doesn't understand that we're taller and we have a different perspective than she has. So that's egocentrism. Here's another example. I guess we could call this an example of what we're going to call centration. Let me show it to you. Here. Good. I know you're upset because you want 2 cookies instead of 1. Do you want me to give you 2? Okay. Here you go. Now you have 2. Okay? Okay. I could not pull that trick. Good. I could not pull that trick with my 11-year-old, right? Because my 11-year-old would know that all I did was take 1 cookie and break it into 2. But all that Elise is able to focus on is the fact that there was 1 cookie there, and now it appears as though there's 2 separate objects. She doesn't really understand or can't make sense of the fact that, well, the way we got those 2 objects is just by breaking the 1 in half. She's focusing her attention too narrowly on the fact that now there are 2. And we're going to look at some more tasks that illustrate centration, that illustrate egocentrism and irreversibility. Bottom line, children in this pre-operational stage lack what we call conservation. So they can't grasp the fact that mass and volume and number stays the same despite the changes in the form of an object. So I don't want to say too much more about that because I have what's called the water task that does a really nice job of illustrating centration, or rather a lack of conservation. And you'll see that the development of conservation, or the ability to understand conservation, is really the hallmark of the concrete stage, which is the next stage. But children in this pre-operational stage have yet to develop what we call theory of mind. So theory of mind being an awareness that other people's behaviors might be influenced by their own beliefs and their own emotions that are different from the child. So in other words, they're not able to put themselves into someone else's shoes. They're not able to see someone else's perspective. This is an example of research done to test children's theory of mind. So you can see how researchers try to explore children's presumptions about other people's mental states. So here's an example of something that a child might be shown to test theory of mind. This little cartoon. So we have Sally and Anne. Sally puts her ball in the red cupboard. In the red cupboard, yes. Sally goes away. Anne moves the ball to the blue cupboard. Where will Sally look for her ball? To a child that has theory of mind, where will they say Sally will look? They'll say that Sally's going to look in the red cupboard because that's where Sally left it. And from Sally's perspective, it should still be in the red cupboard. But for a child who lacks theory of mind, who only knows what they just saw and do, they're going to say that Sally's going to look in the blue cupboard because they can't put themselves into Sally's position or into Sally's perspective They're basing their answer just based on what they saw and therefore what they know to be true. They lack the theory of mind to be able to put themselves in Sally's shoes. Starting roughly at age 7 until about age 11, Piaget says that children enter what he called the concrete operational stage, which is essentially that children are able to understand the world around them based on their own personal concrete experiences. At this point, children understand conservation, so they're not going to fail at the water task that we're going to look at, but they're still incapable of abstract thought. At this point, children are going to start becoming less gullible. They'll start questioning some of the imaginary things, let's say, that they've been led to believe up until this point. And the one of the hallmarks of this concrete operational stage is the understanding of conservation. Finally, the stage that you're all in right now that begins at about age 12, Piaget called the formal operational stage, where children begin to have the ability to think abstractly, to deduce consequences. If this happens, then this may happen, to ponder more introspective questions and problems, like how do I fit in with my peers, or what is love, or what is fairness, what's justice, why do we exist? This is something that comes at the end of our cognitive development.